right, so welcome everyone to OSPO on Track. So we will kick off this today with great panelists here on the value of the OSPO, measuring the value of the OSPO. But before that, I'm Hannah Jimenez. I'm the program manager at TODO Group, and I would like to share with you a few words before getting started. First of all, while in the conference, while in this track, please make sure to follow our TODO Code of Conduct. We're also really grateful for our program committee that we're reviewing and making sure to build a great schedule for today's OSPO on Track. Enjoy, network, learn from each other. And I've also wanted to make a big announcement we've done today. So the TODO Group, in collaboration with other organizations, released I think it's the 6th edition of the State of the OSPOs and Open Source Initiative Survey. So we have been, we saw really interesting insights in terms of how OSPOs are helping the sustainability of open source projects and becoming this supporting team of the security team. So the results are already open. The data is already open as well in our repo, also in the Linux Foundation blog. If you follow us on LinkedIn, you will be able to find those results. And saying that, again, enjoy, learn, and please welcome, big applause to our panelists of today. Thank you.
Well, I think we have 3 minutes, 2 minutes.
We're about, hello? We're about 3 minutes early, so we're just gonna pause for a little and allow folks to come in. Thank you, Anna, for that great introduction. How's everyone today? Good?
Awesome.
Yeah, great. That's so good.
Someone had coffee. Yeah, you just get to watch us sit here awkwardly for the last 3 minutes.
I hope you all were able to find the room okay. Yeah.
Considering 6 hours time differences for me, it's still my working time, so I'm super fine here.
That's good. Where are you from?
China.
And where? Where?
Shanghai.
Ah, great.
So this is the test run before next week's Open Source Summit.
Yeah, you will join that?
No, sadly.
Okay.
Where are folks located? How many people here are from the EU? Oh, great. Easy way to get in today.
Yeah.
And how many people in APAC? Just one? Oh.
Just Yui.
And North America? Woo, good amount of people.
Are there any other areas left? I'm curious now.
South America?
South America? I don't believe there's a large presence of open source in South America yet, but hopefully I'll get there. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So hi everyone, welcome to Open Source Summit EU. I'm super excited to kick off the sessions for day 1 of the summit, and I can't wait for all of the great conversations that we're going to have here today. And thank you all for being here with us in person in Bilbao, Spain, and as well as those who are joining us virtually online. Thank you for being here and supporting us. So I want to start off by introducing myself. My name is Chan Voong. I am a program manager with the Comcast Open Source Program Office, or the OSPO. And I'm honored to host this lovely panel This is a dynamic group of delightful, dependable, and dedicated people. We've got Daniel, Don. Woo! We have Daniel, Don, and David. I hope you enjoyed the little alliteration I just gave there. But I also want to give a little bit of background. We initiated this panel through the CHAOSS working group. And CHAOSS is a Linux Foundation project that stands for Community Health Analytics in Open Source Software. CHAOSS helps people to better understand their health of open source projects that they're engaged with. So please check out the CHAOSS group. I also want to give a big thanks to Matt Germanprey, who is a co-founder of CHAOSS, and he's the one who actually helped submit this abstract and help us get this accepted. And unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, but just want to say thanks to Matt for his work and support in getting us all here. So because we've initiated through the CHAOSS working group, we care about community health analytics. And so today we're going to discuss how to effectively communicate metrics in the context of OSPOs and how to demonstrate the value of OSPOs. We'll also discuss some of the challenges that we face in identifying metrics for OSPOs. But before we dig into all of that, I'd like for this lovely panel to introduce themselves. And along with your introductions, I'd love to hear also what your favorite thing is to measure, or something that you are always measuring. For example, the thing I measure a lot are ropes and routes. I'm a rock climber, so I am always measuring how much rope it takes to get on a route, and my rope is in meters, but my routes are in feet because I'm from the United States, and the measurement gets a lot to think about when I'm climbing. But that's just an example, and I'd love to hear who you all are and what you like to measure. So, Daniel, you want to kick us off?
I go first?
Yes.
Good. So, hey everyone, this is Daniel Izquierdo. I'm one of the co-founders of Bitergia. I'm currently holding the position of CEO. I'm at the board level, CHAOSS community, and I'm as well part of the Inner Source Commons Foundation community. I'm holding the position of president nowadays. What I like to measure, basically, what the company I work for is measuring everything, but I personally love these smartwatches that is basically measuring steps, not climbing, it's about forcing you to do things.
I'm Dawn Foster. I've been working in open source for 20 plus years at companies like Intel and VMware, and now I am director of data science for the CHAOSS project. So I just started that as a new role in August, I guess, and I'm really, really enjoying it because I get to play with data all day, and I get to work with a whole bunch of really cool, awesome people. So I am absolutely loving it. I like to measure lots of things. I also obsessively measure steps and workouts. I cook a lot, so I'd like to say that I measure, but I'm more of a handful at a time kind of person. So it's less about measuring and more about throwing something tasty together. I also like to measure responsiveness. So I like to look at responsiveness in open source communities. So are people actually responding in a timely manner to things? So that's probably one of my favorite metrics.
All right, and I'm David Hirsch. I work with Dynatrace. I'm their open source program manager. And I've been interacting lately a lot with some communities, mostly Captain and Open Feature. These are two CNCF projects, but I also work quite a bit with foundations. So To Do Group, in the past, a bit more with the Inner Source Commons. Now, sadly, not that much anymore. And I measure a lot of things. A little bit too much, I would say. Probably the one I focus on the most is the coffee intake. Trying to get that down. Yeah, Thanks.
Thank you all. You know, from your introductions, you all have very varying experiences, and which means that you've have come across a lot of different people. Can you tell me more about your stakeholders? Who are they, and what types of language do you use to connect or talk to your stakeholders? And David, can you start us off?
Yeah, all right. So we take kind of a bit of a all-inclusive approach when it comes to stakeholders. So whenever working with an open source project, whether it be something we're just contributing to, or if it's a project we want to open source, kind of go from one extreme to the other. Whether it be developers that we need to involve in the legal or even businessy aspects of some projects, all the way to sometimes even consulting our CTO. So it can really go from one way to the other. We have along the path, we have product managers, we have program managers such as myself. Yeah, and very often we really try to get each and every stakeholder to appreciate the different views and problems that the other ones will face when it comes to contributing or, yeah, open sourcing something new.
And I think from a measurement perspective, you know, with open source projects, right, it's all out there in the open, so you can just grab the data and measure it. And I think sometimes we forget that one of our biggest stakeholders when we're measuring and looking at an open source community is the community itself. And remembering to go back to those stakeholders and talk to the community. And does this make sense? Is this data look right to you? And you get sometimes you get some really interesting feedback, and you realize that maybe something that you thought was happening isn't, because there's some difference in this community, and you only know that by talking to the community as a stakeholder.
Yeah, and I feel that because as a program manager in an OSPO, you get kind of sucked into always talking to legal or security or product owners, and then you forget, oh yeah, I'm doing this because of my community. You forget that they're your stakeholders. Daniel, did you want to add?
Oh yeah, I just remember this maturity model released by Anna a couple of years ago on, you know, the evolution of the OSPOs and so on and so forth, collaboration with the group, etc. So the very beginning is, yes, compliance, legal, etc. But then once you move beyond that step, it's about having this conversation, going back to the communities that are part of your, you know, tech stack in a big corporation, and say, okay, so these communities here are, we can see them as providers as well, right? You are using the technology that they are producing. So then, and because you have, you know, certain, let's say, risk assessment, or you are helping your commercial providers, for profit providers, so open source communities is kind of the same. So what do they need? So then we can help them to be sustainable with me as a corporation, right? So it's and then metrics is when it comes to a key part of the conversation.
And in that conversation, as you're kind of building up the narratives and the stories to tell those stakeholders, how do you go from creating a narrative and then kind of converting that into numbers, or vice versa? How do you go from numbers to then changing those into narratives to go back to those stakeholders? And Dawn, would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I do tend to start from the data and then create the narrative, and I think that's important, because if you look at a lot of, in particular, open source metrics tools, or just open source metrics in general, a lot of times it's kind of a wall of dashboards, right? And it requires some interpretation, and part of that interpretation is building a narrative around it so that people can understand what they're looking at and understand what that really means to the community or to the executives. And I tend to think of the narratives as being different. I think David has a slightly different approach, but I tend to think of the narratives as, you know, one narrative for maybe your executives. So this is why we have these communities. This is why we have an OSPO. This is why we're doing this open source thing. And, you know, and you can tell that, you can use the data, you can create a narrative around it based on the person that you're talking to. And so I see that narrative as being quite different when you're talking to maybe maybe an open source developer or a maintainer, you might talk about the project in a slightly different way and build a slightly different narrative, even based on the same data.
Yeah, all right. We do kind of have a little bit of a different approach. I mean, for us, it's really different sets of data and metrics for different stakeholders. So when we're talking about the public aspect of a project, I mean, we'll obviously be focusing more on community metrics. We'll be working more to make sure the community is healthy and all these types of aspects. What we try to really remind ourselves is also we work for a company, and so we always have this necessity to demonstrate that it is worth investing in open source projects, and that's why we have this really, let's call it really, it's the flip side of these metrics, where it's how do we contribute to our business, and these aren't metrics that obviously the community would care about. It's of no interest for them, but these are what help us maintain our OSPO, grow it. I mean, we've gotten all the way from 8 people to 30 in the last 2 years that just work on open source. And this has helped us a lot.
Yeah, going back to the discussion of narrative such is the question I always try to ask myself is, what is the most effective way of communicating this to the person I have in front of me? And what matters to that person? So if we go to certain levels, upper management, maybe they talk money, and this is how you need to transform. Somehow it's about contextualizing the data you have into something meaningful to the person that you have in front of you. So if this is VP level, perhaps it's money. If this is developers, perhaps it's collaboration or technology. If this is marketing, maybe it's about big numbers and being proud of the work that we've been doing. So that depends a lot on who we are, basically. And so then it's about trying to contextualize the numbers, because if we talk about commits or companies or so, that's not that meaningful. But then if we transform this into the context we are part of, then this is the point where that makes sense. There's a click, right?
Yeah, really understanding who your audience is for those visualizations, and how many dashboards, I guess, you want to create for each of those stakeholders.
And perhaps the point is that you don't even have the data, but you know that there is a message that you need to send to that person or to that team. Then you will, data comes later. So it's just a tool to be more effective in communicating or making decisions or so. But then it's I would say probably for me it's way more impactful to have like the pitch or the what you want, the message, and then perhaps it happens that you don't have the data yet. Okay, good. I need to do this work, but we'll go there.
Yeah, no, and yeah, that's pretty much what we saw is when we were looking at community metrics, a lot of times the goals are quite arbitrary. I mean, what are you comparing your goals against? You can compare against other projects, but is that really a great way to go at it? You can have the standard, hyper growth idea where you're looking at a, 200, 300% growth over quarter, which is a very businessy way to look at your community. Yeah, but when it comes to internal metrics that help us, again, justify, and as you said, if you're going to a VP, if you're going to anyone within your company, you can have metrics that are really related to development of other parts of your product or things like that. So that's pretty much what we tried to do, and it's, as I said, it's been working a lot better ever since we switched our focus.
Yeah, one of the things I always try to do when building kind of narratives around this is that if you can tie it back to the goals of your company in some way. I mean, that's one of the things that I did when I worked at Pivotal and was working on our Kubernetes strategy, was I tried to tie everything back somehow that we were doing in the community to a product goal, to a company goal, something like that, so that people could see that we're not just doing this for fun, like, we're a business and we're doing certain things within the community and participating in the community because it benefits us as a company as well, in addition to benefiting the community.
Daniel, you spoke on perhaps not having the data readily available yet, and but knowing what your message might be to the stakeholders. And I think a lot of people who are starting off in their OSPOs or who want to demonstrate the value of their OSPOs to their organization probably want to get that data but aren't sure how. What are some of the tools that you all use to create some of these measurements, and what are the metrics, what are the metrics models, and what are the tools that you're using for those?
Okay. Well, I can start with tools, then we can have further conversation.
Sure.
Yeah, so tools coming from the CHAOSS community. So there are two main pieces of software that you can use basically. Both of them are heavily based on research, so you can basically trust what they are producing. You have a consistent way of gathering data, taking care of the data storage, taking care of the data don't decay. So it's all about having these, let's say, core data competencies covered. So then you forget about that complexity of the world, right? So once you have that, you can think of these couple of tools or Grimoire Lab. I'm one of the original developers of Grimoire Lab, so just in case you have questions later. But both of them, you can think of like a metrics lake, right? So it's like we all know concept of data lake. So this is like a metrics lake. So it's about learning first what you need from a goals perspective, from a business objectives, and then you transform that into metrics. And then, yeah, some of the metrics will be there out of the box, some of them may not be there, so you need to do, certain development, data transformation, whatever. But there is a starting point with all of the data that matters to you. But if you think about the whole tech stack of a big corporation, we are talking about the level of thousands of open source projects, libraries, that are part of this. So you need a place where you can store everything in one place. You forget about all that process. And then once you have the right questions in place, then it's where you go there and say, okay, do I have the right data here? How do I transform the data to make those decisions? So dashboards, reports, metrics models in CHAOSS, that's something that we are working together. Of course, you are more than welcome to join, have further discussions with us, and probably metrics models. You can introduce them.
Yeah, so one of the things we've realized is that we, as the CHAOSS project, we had developed a whole bunch of metrics as standalone individual metrics. And what we quickly realized was that the metrics were a lot more valuable if people thought of them as collections of metrics. So the idea was that we'd create these, what we called metrics models, which are groups or collections of metrics that can be used together to understand some important component of a project or a community. And so one of the ones that I've been working on, which is based on some of the work that I did at VMware, is the starter project health metrics model, which is 4 really simple metrics. If people want to get started measuring project health, it's 4 things that they can look at that give them kind of an overall picture of the health of their project. With the idea being that you don't stop there. It's just you start with those 4, see what else you need, then you can build on it. You can get some other metrics along with that. So I've been gathering those mostly using the Augur tool, but another tool which is technically not a CHAOSS tool, but implements a whole bunch of metrics models and other metrics, which is OSS Compass. So that's something that Yehui works on. So if you have questions about OSS Compass, he's the one to ask. But they implement a whole bunch of the CHAOSS metrics and metrics models within that particular tool.
All right, I'm going to be here to disappoint again. No, so I already kind of described how we really take these 2 separate approaches. One is the more software development metrics that we care about internally, and there we use basic platforms like Jira. It's really using a ticketing system. But there we use it to check mostly how are we contributing to the other parts of the organization, so the other business units. It's a very good way to justify, hey, we've contributed, 5,000 hours this last month. How much does that equate to in headcount? Is it a fun way to look at open source? No, not really, but necessary. And then we have what I would call the more community-focused metrics. And there we started out with tools like Grimoire Lab and things like that. I think this is a really interesting tool when it comes to, again, information focused on development. in the sense having a good view of the ratio between commits and returning committers and all these types of things. You can get this from really easily from Grimoire Lab. What we tried recently were some other tools that looked at more awareness and engagement, going beyond the what is happening in GitHub, looking at even social media Slack channels, really putting all this information together, the analytics from the documentation pages. And tools were, for example, I think Orbit was one of them, or Common Room. So these are tools where you can actually even, I would say, you can get started for free and you can try them out. Should you rely 100% on this data? Obviously, no. You really have to mix it all up, and if you want to create a dashboard for it, you can try. I just have 3 separate at this point, and that's just my life, is these 3 dashboards. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of tools out there. You mentioned a couple of CHAOSS projects and non-CHAOSS projects that are open source. Grimoire Lab, Augur, OSS Compass is not part of it, but another one. And then it sounds like your OSPO is using Jira, GitHub to pull all of the data to then be used in some of these analytics tools. I'm curious to hear, what are some of the use cases that you have for Can you describe any specific use cases for some of these tools that you have, or any specific metrics?
Okay, I start. Okay, so disclaimer, of course, I'm part of Bitergia, so we are a for-profit company, so then we offer open source OSPO services. So, said this, for our customers, there are several use cases, and in general, some of the most important are probably the concept of influence. So what is my influence in the open source communities or ecosystems that we are part of? And for instance, they don't care that much if they are technical leaders or if they are in the 4th, 5th, let's say, step in producing code or so, but it's about understanding, having a full understanding. So how can we measure influence? That depends. That depends a lot even in the community that we are part of. For instance, we can think of communities that they have that rely a lot on code review. That is kind of a usual practice, right, in open source. It was not that usual like 10, 15 years ago, but nowadays it's kind of the standard. Okay, so you can measure influence by the number of committers, basically, or people that have the right to write in the main line over the years. And basically, because they are the ones that are in somehow deciding if this piece of code enters into the main line, right? So those are technical leaders that have certain traction within the community. They did the merits to be there. So they were kind of elected by other committers to be there. So influence could be measured perhaps in somehow a workaround on number of committers or people doing code reviews. Or for instance, how fast is your journey to become a core committer? So depending on the community, that's a different way of measuring that influence. Impact, that's another way. So what does it mean, impact, for you? So when we have that question on the table, it's about, okay, what does it mean, impact, for you? For each of us and all the people here, we may have slightly different answer to that question, because impact might be social media. Impact might be having new features in place. Impact might be being a good player in a good open source citizen. So that depends a lot. So I don't know, probably you have way more use cases.
Yeah, I would say one of the ones I spend a lot of time thinking about right now is the data science use case. So a lot of open source program offices have data scientists, at least for the bigger ones, the Red Hats, the Googles, the Microsofts, have people who are in data science roles to help their organization understand what value they're getting out of their OSPO, or understand what kind of impact they're having in these open source communities. So within the CHAOSS project, we've formed recently a working group that's focused on the data science use case. And so we spend a lot of time talking to amongst ourselves as data scientists, along with data analysts, and folks from CHAOSS to better understand how it is that data scientists use our tools, our metrics, and use that to help their organizations understand the data that they have.
All right. Yeah, we take a bit of a pragmatic approach. A very easy example right now is this project, Open Feature Standardization for Feature Flags. And we know that if we want something to become a standard, we need to have adoption mostly from enterprises. That's just how it works. Most open source projects that succeed have enterprise adoption. So when we look at our metrics, what we're trying to measure is which companies are contributing the most, whether they are actually speaking to us or not. We want to know, that way we can get in touch with them and understand, are they adopters? Because I think that's one of the hardest things to really measure out there in open source is someone using this project, you'll never know. Usually you'll know the day you decide to sunset it. Because they'll be complaining, oh, we've been using this in production. And you're like, thanks, could have helped 3 years ago. Yeah.
So indeed, Shannon, what is what matters to you?
Right, yeah. And I really enjoy hearing your perspectives on that because you all, again, come from such different backgrounds. You know, Bitergia as a kind of a consulting and CHAOSS as an open community for helping analytics and Dynatrace, specifically in your role from an OSPO point of view. So I'm really enjoying the wave of experience here. I think we have about 15 minutes in this panel, and I actually want to, instead of asking more questions to you all, I actually want to open it up to this great full room that we have here. Oh, and the hand raised really quickly back there, so. Thank you, Gail.
Oh, we can start this. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I'm Claire Dillon, and I'm asking specifically for David because you mentioned the metrics that helped your OSPO grow from 8 people to 30 people, which is an extraordinary achievement. So can you explicitly say what were the top 3 metrics that actually drove that, and indeed what level of increase in those metrics made a difference?
I wish they were only 3.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, any you care to mention will help.
So as I mentioned before, really a part of it was thanks to our internal ticketing system. Like, I cannot stress how much I don't like ticketing systems, but almost as much as I dislike social media, but different discussion. And really seeing our contributions to the different departments helped us. Like, we could measure the hours dedicated by our engineers to advance our product on whether it be applications, microservices, infrastructure, things like that. So we could really measure this and justify why we need more people. What we're trying to get to now is the next step will be measuring indirectly our contribution to income, to revenue. And that will be a bit more difficult. As I said, it's quite indirect. So let's say we work in the field of observability. So we have to contribute to OpenTelemetry. And our OpenTelemetry team works 100% upstream. That's all they do. They're part of the community. They're part of the governance committees. They're part of the technical committees. And we want to know if by building something that helps us better satisfy our customers, how much does this change the income of the company? And then how much can we then indirectly relate to the open source team? It's a very businessy approach. I don't particularly enjoy it too much, but it's a necessary approach. Hope that's pretty much it, I'd say.
Thank you. Hi. So at Mercedes, we have metrics, and we have a few problems with some of these. So 2 problems. Let me outline 2 problems. The first one is, so we had metrics in place, and then they were reported from each department, and then at the end, at some point, we found out people were working to fulfill the metrics, but not the spirit of the metrics, you know. Okay, you're all nodding, I guess you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, if I tell you how I measure you, you know, that will determine what you work on, and that's obviously, so that's wrong. So question, how do you tackle that? The second one is, We wanted to measure, for example, contributions coming from out of our organizations towards open source. And then along came our Workers' Council and said, you could measure somebody's performance with that, we don't allow it. You know, so we would have to install an extra layer to abstract that, and that kind of did away with that because that's so much effort, you know, so how to do that? Okay, I don't know if that makes sense, yeah?
Yeah, the gaming of metrics is super hard, right? I've seen that backfire on lots of people over the years. One of the things that I try to do, and it's not entirely perfect, but I try to focus on metrics that if they try to game it, it's still going to have a good improvement in the community. So things like, you know, are you keeping up with pull requests and closing them in a timely fashion? You can kind of game that, but you're still going to be closing them in a timely fashion, right? So I try to, as much as possible, and like I said, it's not perfect, but try to focus on the ones that even if they do try to game it, it's still going to have a positive impact.
Yeah, what I would say as well here is I don't know how much you have internally in terms of educating people on the use of metrics. That's one. So it's about having a common, a more homogeneous way of using metrics as another tool, not as a goal, but as another tool. And then the other is because you are having teams that are reporting on metrics. I assume that perhaps some of those are slightly similar, but that they are not gathered or measured exactly in the same way. So they will kind of trick the metric perhaps to gamify them. So then what if you try to centralize all of that process in one place, then you bring the feedback from the teams about, okay, what makes sense from a project level perspective, team level perspective, forget about having individuals in the numbers, basically make that anonymous, remove that information at all as much as you can, and then bring their opinions and feedback to the discussion. So then you produce the numbers, and then you can see how things are moving forward. But then, so then you get the same exactly way of measuring, the same metric all across teams or projects. That's one thing. And the other is about having them onboarded on making the decision of, okay, this is the right metric or KPI that I would be using in my case. If that makes sense? Okay.
Yeah, maybe, oh, sorry. I was just gonna, maybe for point one of your question, our metrics, let's say, that I mentioned before, those aren't used to measure the performance of, for example, the developers, who are the ones actually working on the projects. Those are really used on the, say, more product management side. Our developers are really, they have as metrics the usual ones. So that's why they also have, let's say, this duplicate work, sadly, of creating, whenever they have an issue in GitHub, they create a duplicate in Jira, essentially, and this is a way they're then measured on normal software development best practices, like how much time is spent on bug fixing and things like this. So there's no way to really, they're not even interested in, let's say, finding a way around increasing these numbers or things like that.
This is all incredibly fascinating and super relevant, at least for me. One question I have, so I work for a...
Sydney, do you mind bringing up the mic?
Hi, how's that? Yeah, so I work for a foundation. We build software for scientists. And so we don't have revenue, per se, to be able to point to and say, like, we have impact on organization goals X, Y, and Z that we can measure through revenue or, like, some contribution to it or whatever. One of the things that we've run into is that there's, for all other intents and purposes, we operate like a tech startup. And one of the things that we've run into is that our values are very much aligned with open source. Open source, open everything is written into our values and our ways of doing things. But we still have OKRs, we still have roadmaps, we still have internal software teams, which, for all intents and purposes, operate like any other software team, right? One of the things that we struggle with, and I'm curious for your input on, is how do you make the case or help teams quantify or understand the trade-off between the velocity of building something themselves for their own specific use case internally that helps them hit their OKRs faster versus the long-term sustainability and the general good citizenship and like open source values that comes along with instead contributing upstream to an open source project and partnering in that way, especially since those longer term impacts like long-term sustainability that can come with open source. I don't have numbers for those right now, right? Because that's a long-term outcome. How do you help teams reason about that choice or that trade-off?
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm trying to just split it up in pieces. I mean, the whole idea of essentially what you're saying is how can you justify the advantages and quantify them, you know, from choosing open source over non-open source. And
or building yourself versus contributing to the community, and the trade-off there between velocity and long-term sustainability.
I mean, when it comes to understanding the effort in maintenance and all of these things, you can get estimates. Unless you decide to do both at the same time, you're never going to have a precise number. That's the most I can say is decide whether your team can create an estimate and show you, okay, if we do this ourselves, it will take us 5 months and we'll need 6 people to work full time. And you could calculate how much this would cost you. Will it be 100% true? No, but it will be as close as you can get. The other option is really just doing both, and I don't think that makes much sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is one of those things that metrics for this is really, really hard. Generally, where I've tried to have this conversation is at a more strategic level about, and tried to help people understand why it's important, and understanding that, you know, contributing those patches back upstream is going to save you a lot of time in the long run. But that's not really, yeah, it's hard because it's not really a metrics discussion, and it's really hard to get people at a lot of companies, particularly people who are trying to get their products out, they're trying to meet their OKRs, they've got a lot of short-term deliverables, to try to get them to understand that something will be better for them in 3 to 5 years is a really hard sell. So it's a really good question. It's hard.
Yeah, I'll bring some anecdotal data here to the discussion. And this is, I'm killing our presentation, Yahui, on Thursday. So basically, I was doing some numbers on Bitergia's kind of journey, right? So we started at academia, and we started around 2000 something with research on free software engineering, basically. So that was the research group. So we started the company, we founded the company in 2012. So that means 12 years of doing research until we have something that we said, and the purpose of the research group was not to create a company, but it happened. Okay? So it took 12 years to say, and now we can try the technology in production. Good, 12 years, research to production. And then we were testing the market as a company. We were a small startup in Spain, I know, 4, 5, 6 years approximately. Then in 2017, CHAOSS was funded. So that means plus 5 years. And then between 2017 and 2023, nowadays, basically 4 projects, Linux Foundation Insights, OSS Compass, Cauldron, Bitergia Analytics, and some others were created on top of Grimoire Lab. So basically what I mean here is 12 years of work, research, 5 years to test the market, and then just 4 years to build something on top of existing open source technology. So basically all of that knowledge, you can produce something and start something like from scratch. There must be academic research on the field. I'm not aware of this, but this is an anecdotal data, that's what I mean. But in just that 2, 3 years, 1 year, you can have something in production. Yahui, I think your experience is in 1 year you have OSS Compass basically running, right, as a SaaS service. Yeah, kind of. So that's the power of basically working upstream and collaborating with the community. You don't have to do anything by yourself. You start from existing knowledge. You're welcome.
I actually have something to add. I think a lot of OSPOs out there are just starting out. Our OSPO is a small group, and so we struggle with capacity sometimes and the challenges of velocity and thinking about our long-term goals as well. And we sometimes operate like a startup as well. We have to have that mindset. And so I think it's extremely challenging to be able to answer that question, I think. And one of the things I've kind of thought of in hearing you all speak is that sometimes it's more of an anecdotal message that you have to have, or it's estimates. As a person who's in data science, I hate estimates. I love the numbers. I need to see, and my team probably knows that, I need to see the exact numbers. And sometimes you just have to let that go. There's things where you just have to take what you can to get that correct message out. Yeah, it's going to take a long time to be able to do that, and so it's a marathon, I think. It's kind of my contribution to this answer. Yes.
Thank you. So I'm also working for a large automotive company, and we are trying to get the company to invest more in consuming and also contributing to open source. And from your experience, what metrics have been successful on an executive level, and what do you need to measure in order to provide these metrics?
Perhaps we can ask the question to Wolfgang. Do you want the mic?
Wolfgang has also been part of CHAOSS and has provided a lot of contributions. He may be able to answer the question if you'd like to. No, you don't? But maybe someone else would like to.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Regarding consuming open source and giving some kind of metrics that provide the value of the usage, usually a metric that usually is useful is I ensure that your company is already consuming open source at some level. So basically, if you measure the number of dependencies you already have, the number of contributors that have contributed to these dependencies, and then you explain to your managers, consider the amount of money we need to build this by ourselves, and consider consuming and contributing back to the community or to the technological ecosystems we are being part of. If you're thinking about sustainability, not only about environment sustainability, but also technological sustainability, this is a key point. At least in our case, has worked.
Yeah, and the other thing I would think about is what is it that your executives care about, and back into it that way. So what is it that your executives care about? What is going to make them understand what it is that you're doing and the value that it has, and find ways to measure that. So it starts with like a conversation about what's important and what the goals are, and then find the data that helps support that.
Yeah. I would add, I think any company that believes they can do software without using open source is kind of kidding themselves a little bit. I think last year we had a report internally of the number of components used, whether it be in production or for testing or whatnot. I think it was somewhere around 30,000 open source components. And that was growing by like 20% every month. So, I mean, if we had to build each and everything on our own, we wouldn't be going anywhere.
I think we're over time. Yeah, we're over time, but I want to thank everyone for being here today. I really appreciate it. I think that this is a really important conversation. Is there a workshop that is going to happen on Thursday for CHAOSS?
Let's invite all.
I would have given you the answer.
It wasn't originally. We had some logistical challenges.
Oh, okay, yeah. I see. we're here this whole week, and I just want to thank you all for kicking this off with us. We're here this whole week. There's so many other people part of CHAOSS as well, and I think everyone has the same questions of how do we get metrics, how do we do this right, and so let's keep the conversation going this week. Let's hang out and talk to each other.
And
Thank you all.
thanks to Gail for running the mic.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.